We let our neighbor's kids swim in our pool occasionally. One day, he slipped and scraped his elbow. He laughed it off. But the next week, we got a lawsuit. Negligence resulting in lasting emotional trauma. I tried to reason with them. They refused. Then the court summons came with photos of a dirty pool filter, molded invoices, proof of unsafe conditions. But the timestamp on every photo? From months before they ever swam. I live in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. A quiet part of town where life is simple and trust runs deep. My wife and I always tried to be good neighbors. We welcomed the children from the block to our home. One of those children was Caleb, our neighbor's kid, who would pop by regularly for a swim in our backyard pool on hot days. We trusted the idea that a little kindness could go a long way. One scorching afternoon, Caleb came over as usual. I remember the day clearly. The sun beating down on the tired asphalt, the sound of sprinkler water mixing with distant car horns. Caleb, bright and bubbly, ran to the pool like a wild child, laughing at the carefree nature of youth. Later, while chasing a stray ball near the pool's edge, he lost his footing on the slick tiles and scraped his elbow badly. I rushed over, my heart pounding, ready to help him, but he dismissed it with a giggle. "I'm okay, Mr. Dawson," he repeated, his voice full of youthful bravado. I reassured him and called his mom later to explain that it was just a small accident. I never imagined that this small incident would come back to haunt me. The following week, I found a thick envelope on our doorstep. The envelope contained a lawsuit titled, "Negligence Resulting in Lasting Emotional Trauma." I was stunned. The claim was made not by Caleb's mother but by a lawyer representing a party I had never met, a stranger using a legal tactic to twist our act of kindness into a liability. I tried to talk to her on the phone but was met with silence and curt messages that told me nothing more than to wait for the next court date. A couple of days later, a court summons arrived, delivered by a local process server in a crisp suit. Along with it, I received a folder packed with evidence. There were several photos of our pool filter. Each photo showed a dark, grimy buildup of dirt and what looked like mold. In addition, there were invoices that claimed our pool service was overdue. And these invoices suggested that we had neglected our responsibilities. But here's the twist. Every single document was dated months before we ever let Caleb or any other child swim in our pool. I spent many sleepless nights sitting at my kitchen table, poring over old emails, maintenance records, and videos captured from our security system. Everything said that we had been diligent about cleaning and maintaining our pool. The pool service company confirmed that the routine cleaning schedules were always met, and that the filter had only recently needed a routine check, not the kind of overhaul the attorney was describing. It became painfully clear that someone was trying to use outdated evidence to hurt us. The trial was set to take place in a weathered old courtroom in downtown Cincinnati. As the day approached, anxiety built inside me like a slow, simmering anger. I tried to speak to Caleb's mom once more, to get an explanation, but all my efforts were met with cold responses. I wasn't sure if she even knew how her son's accidental scrape would become the start of such a relentless legal fight. I was left feeling betrayed in a way that cut deeper than any physical injury. On the day of the trial, I stood before the judge, my hands gripping the worn wooden bench. I recalled every detail. The laughter of a young boy who had shrugged off a scrape, the genuine care we had taken to fix his injury, and our strict adherence to the maintenance routine of our pool. I presented our records, my voice growing firmer with every word. I even shared the video footage that clearly showed that the pool had been maintained, and the dates verified that the so-called proof of neglect was irrelevant. In the courtroom, it felt like time slowed. The opposing lawyer, a man with a cold demeanor and sharp suit, presented his evidence methodically. He pointed to the dirty filter photos, the moldy invoices, and recited the dates as if they were an unchallengeable fact. I saw the witnesses from his side smirking confidently, as if they had already won the argument by reading from a script. But I knew the truth. I knew that the evidence was planted from a past that had no bearing on the present. After a long day of legal sparring, the judge finally spoke. "Mr. Dawson, while the evidence is disturbing, I must consider whether it directly relates to the incident in question. The records and timestamps suggest that your property was well maintained at the time of the accident. I rule in your favor and dismiss the case." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I stood there, a mix of relief and burning anger coursing through me. I felt like I had beaten a man made entirely of false claims, but I knew this was just the first battle. I left the courthouse with a promise to myself that I would not let such manipulation pass without a proper reckoning. That night, under the lonely glow of a street lamp outside my house, I confronted the accuser's lawyer in a deserted parking lot. "Your false evidence," I said, my voice gruff and low, "has hurt my life. You have twisted a small accident into a tool to ruin my good name. I demand answers, and I demand that you face the truth." He stared at me with icy eyes and simply said, "In law, evidence is evidence." But his tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. I left that encounter with a heavy heart and a vow to expose all those who used deceit in courtrooms. The neighborhood soon heard about the trial. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with suspicion. I began speaking up at local meetings, sharing my side of the story, and posting on the community website about the dangers of using old records to target innocent people. What started as a simple act of kindness had turned into a bitter fight for truth and honor. I had become a symbol, one man taking a stand against a force that seemed to delight in twisting the truth for profit. I kept gathering support and uncovered more details that pointed to shady practices by the law firm representing our accuser. Their tactics were under scrutiny by local journalists, and soon, public opinion began to turn in my favor. I never once forgot that my fight was not just for me, but for every honest neighbor who might one day face a similar injustice. As I began connecting with local reporters and activists, I discovered that I wasn't the only one who had been targeted by this law firm's tactics. In the dim light of a local diner in Middletown, Ohio, I met an elderly gentleman named Ray who told me about his own run-in with the same group. "They took everything from me," he whispered across a nearly empty table. "They claimed I had caused harm with my old tools, using dirt pictures and fake records." His story, though different in detail, echoed the same pain and betrayal I felt. Together, Ray and I realized that this was not an isolated case. It was a deliberate strategy to exploit small, everyday accidents and distort the truth. We began gathering more evidence, linking past cases, and discovering that several families had suffered similar attacks. I even found records of court cases in other small towns like Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Augusta, Georgia. Each case pointed to falsified evidence and manipulated timestamps used to pin the blame on honest homeowners. One chilly evening, as the fall wind rattled the windows of my worn-out study, I received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in plain, unadorned script. "You need to see the bigger picture." I plugged the drive into my aging computer and began watching recorded meetings, video conferences between lawyers, pool service managers, and even some insiders who talked openly about misplacing dates to cover their tracks. The recordings were raw, unedited, and they confirmed my worst suspicions: the entire system was rigged. I spent the following nights burning the midnight oil, meeting with Ray and others who had been similarly wronged. In a tense conversation at an all-night diner in the small town of Evansville, Indiana, I confronted one of the pool service employees. "How can you stand by knowing that your work is being used to hurt people?" I demanded, voice trembling with both anger and hurt. The man, nervous and sweating, could only mumble apologies before he hurried out the door. The more I dug, the more dangerous things became. I started getting anonymous phone calls warning me to stop, to let sleeping dogs lie. One night, a hooded figure left a note taped under my door. "Quit digging or you will regret it." The words chilled me to the bone, but I refused to back down. I had come too far to let fear silence me now. The stakes were too high, not just for me, but for everyone who had suffered at the hands of this twisted scheme. In heated meetings with my lawyer, we started planning our next moves carefully. We would file a countersuit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We gathered affidavits and lined up testimonies from every person whose life had been turned upside down by these underhanded tactics. Every email and recorded conversation added weight to our case. I kept my story plain and simple, telling it like it was, and my lawyer fought hard against the barrage of falsified evidence previously used in court. There were many sleepless nights and long days filled with heated phone calls, scrawled notes, and bitter coffee. My wife noticed the change in me, the ever-present shadow of anger and determination. "What are you doing, James?" she asked one night as we sat in our living room, the low light making every worry clear. "You're losing yourself fighting shadows." I looked into her eyes and replied, "I can't lose who I am, not when so many are paying the price." And I meant every word. Then, the twist came. An unexpected call came from Caleb's mother. A shaky voice on the other end saying, "There's something you need to know." I listened as she admitted that she had been contacted by someone claiming to have evidence that could change everything. She said that a neighbor from a nearby town, one with a long history of envy and disputes, had seen our pool's old photos and had encouraged her to push forward with the lawsuit. It turned out that the false evidence was not just the product of a faceless law firm's greed, but also the result of a personal vendetta. I felt betrayed once more. The very person I thought was a victim had been manipulated into a fight that was not really about Caleb's small scrape, but about a hidden grudge that dated back to an old family feud between our neighborhoods. The revelation left me reeling. I realized that while I had been fighting for my own honor, someone else had planted the seeds of this entire scheme. My plans took a new turn. I had to not only clear my name, but also reveal the true architect of this malicious plot. Every face in the courtroom, every secret meeting, every hushed conversation now had a new meaning. I was no longer fighting just for justice. I was fighting to expose the rotten core of deception that had poisoned our community. In the days that followed, the investigation took an even darker turn. I found out that the scheme wasn't isolated to pool maintenance records. Evidence began to surface that linked the law firm behind the false claims to a powerful local developer known for ruthless tactics to force property owners out of their neighborhoods. Rumors emerged that he had close ties with several local politicians, and that under his influence, law firms would pick on anyone who did not fall in line. While I was busy collecting evidence and documenting every call and meeting, a shocking twist forced me to confront a personal betrayal. My closest friend, Derek, whom I trusted for nearly a decade, turned out to be working behind the scenes with the developers group. One rainy night, Derek approached me outside a rundown gas station in Oxford, Ohio, and said, "James, you're getting in over your head. Walk away now, or it'll be the last thing you do." His words sent a chill through my spine. I had always thought of him as family. The betrayal hit me hard, making every previous injustice bite with an even sharper sting. I soon learned that Derek had been the one passing along our maintenance records, our schedules, and even our security footage, subtly altering them so that they could be used against me. Every time I thought I was careful, he had somehow undercut me from the inside. It felt as if every person around me was part of a vast conspiracy, and I was the only one fighting to stay afloat, while everyone else danced to someone else's tune. But every betrayal only lit a fire in my belly. I began holding secret meetings with Ray, Caleb's mother, who later admitted her regret about being manipulated, and a few brave whistleblowers from within the pool service company. We met in back rooms of local diners, public libraries after closing time, and even at a friend's secluded cabin out in the rural areas near Lexington, Kentucky. We pieced together a timeline that showed how the developers group had been planning to use every scrap of old record to intimidate and drain the pockets of good people. The darker I looked, the more I saw the tangled web of lies that connected corrupt lawyers, greedy developers, and even some local council members. One night, while I was going through a stack of documents in my study, I received a cryptic text from an unknown number. "Your next move determines everything." I felt a mix of fear and determination. The text was unsigned, and I feared it might be another threat, but it also hinted at someone who was on the same side. Who was watching, and who was willing to help? The message left me questioning everything I thought I knew about trust. I didn't have long to ponder these thoughts. The local paper, the Cincinnati Herald, ran an article the next day exposing what seemed to be a pattern of similar cases throughout the region. The article was careful, even-handed, and it caused a stir. Suddenly, my quiet crusade had become a matter of public record. I was not just a victim anymore. I was the face of a movement against corruption. Now, with the public's eye upon us, I received more threats. Anonymous letters warning me to shut up, phone calls where heavy breathing was the only sound, and even a car tailgating me late at night on a deserted road. But this only made me more determined. I started recording every incident, and handed these recordings over to my lawyer. I sent copies of the threatening letters to a local journalist who had proven trustworthy. It seemed that every day brought a new twist in the story, and I was forced to be more cautious yet even more outspoken. Every step I took reminded me that betrayal had many faces, those of friends, neighbors, and even the law. I could feel the weight of countless eyes upon me, each expecting me to collapse under the pressure. But I couldn't let them see me falter. I had to press on, not only to clear my name but to finally unmask the mastermind behind all of this. The deeper I went, the more I realized that the fight was not just about my pool or Caleb's scrape. It was about a whole web of deceit that had been nurtured by greed and personal vendettas over many years. I had reached a point where I could no longer stand by and watch the corruption infect our towns. Every secret meeting, every whispered threat had led to this final showdown. I decided that the only way to end this was to expose the mastermind and bring everyone involved to justice. I set up a meeting with the local district attorney in a small, dimly lit meeting room in a courthouse in Columbus, Ohio. I laid out every piece of evidence, from Derek's betrayal to the altered pool records, and the connection to the powerful local developer, Mr. Harris, a man who had long enjoyed impunity because of his deep ties in the community. The district attorney was a quiet, unassuming person with kind eyes, but I could see determination in his gaze. "Mr. Dawson," he said solemnly, "this is a serious matter. I promise you that we will investigate every angle, from the fake evidence to the bribery and collusion that you have uncovered. We will send a clear message that no one is above the law. His words lit a spark of hope in me, even though I knew the battle would not be easy. Armed with this official backing, I organized a press conference in the downtown square of Columbus. I stood on a weathered wooden platform beneath a banner that simply read, "Truth will prevail." Hundreds of curious onlookers, local reporters, and even some of the very officials implicated in the scandal gathered around. With a steady voice, I recounted every detail of my journey, from the day Caleb scraped his elbow to the moment I uncovered the scheme that had cost so many their peace of mind. I pointed out how the law had been twisted to serve greedy interests, and how even trusted friends, like Derek, had betrayed everything we stood for. "Enough!" I shouted at one point, my voice echoing off the brick walls of the courthouse building. "I will not let old records and cheap tricks ruin lives any longer. Those who planted these lies will pay, and every single person who once stood by will see that the truth has no place in darkness." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a burst of applause from a group of community members who had long suspected foul play. The fallout was immediate. The district attorney launched a full-scale investigation that involved federal authorities. In one swift move, arrests were made. Derek, the friend who had betrayed me, was taken into custody for his role in altering key records. Mr. Harris and several corrupt lawyers from the offending firm found themselves facing charges not just for fraud but for orchestrating a scheme that had ruined lives across several towns. I stood outside the courthouse on that fateful day, watching as news vans and flashing lights signaled that justice was finally being served. I felt a bitter satisfaction mixed with a deep sorrow for everyone caught in the crossfire of greed and deceit. As I watched Derek being led away in handcuffs, I whispered to myself, "You made your choices. Now pay for them." In the days that followed, as the community began to heal, I kept my promise to speak out against corruption. I continued to meet with neighbors and local leaders, sharing my story and urging them to stand up for honesty and fairness. The experience had changed me. I no longer saw the world in simple shades of right and wrong. Now, I saw the deep scars left by betrayal. But I also knew that every lie uncovered was a victory for those who had suffered in silence. I eventually returned to my quiet life, tending to my garden and the pool that once symbolized our open-hearted community. Yet, every time I glanced at the filter or the water shimmering under the sun, I was reminded of the dark days we had endured, and the heavy price paid by those who thought they could cheat the truth. In my final act of retribution, I made sure that every person involved in the plot was held accountable by the full might of the law. The records were cleansed, the lies were laid bare, and the hidden ambitions of the corrupt were exposed for all to see. I left one final message on a local community forum. Remember that truth always finds a way out of the shadows. We all must pay when we try to hide it forever. And so my journey, my fight, ended not with a whisper but with a roar that swept through every corner of our town. I learned that when life forces you into a corner, sometimes you must fight back with every ounce of truth you have. Those who hurt others in their blind greed and envy learned, too late, that justice is a flame that burns forever. In their pursuit of false victories, they had only sealed their own fate. This is my story. The story of a man who was once an ordinary neighbor, who faced betrayal, heartache, and endless challenges, yet emerged with the truth intact. For anyone who dares twist history for personal gain, know this: every lie finds its end, and every misdeed gets its reckoning.